Hi everyone, we are back. So this is the last talk of the day and also last talk of BSides Islamabad 2021. Uh, we have Soniya Shah Noor with us, and she will be discussing about RYUK. If you didn't hear about that, that would be an exciting talk. Before Sonia starts, I would like to say thank you to our audience who remain with us all the day, and also our sponsors as well. Our stellar sponsors, we had TCM Security, eBricks, and Applied Network Defense. And we had sport partners Urdu IT Academy, Global Information Security Professionals of Pakistan, GISPP, SHISEC, Women Cybersecurity Organization, and UltraSmart Drive with us as well. And also, we will finishing off this last talk with the announcement. As you know, we have workshops tomorrow as well. These are hands-on workshops, and that will be starting 9 o'clock Pakistan time tomorrow. So we have first workshop at demystifying cyber threat intelligence hands-on that starts 9 o'clock until 12:30 p.m. The second workshop we will have open source intelligencing the unknown by Khala Kareem. The third hands-on workshop would be writing detection rules effectively by Sayed Hassan from 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. You must have received already the details from info@bsidesislamabad.com. If you have not received the details for tomorrow invites, please reach out to Discord channel and someone will be there to help you out. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you next year as well. So hand it over to Sonia.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank BSides Islamabad firstly to invite me for this conversation and this talk. And I'm super excited for everyone to get on board and study and explore the malware Ryuk, which I like to call the Shinigami of the cyber world. So let's move on. Before we talk a little bit about the actual topic, I would like to talk a bit about me because, I cannot leave my narcissism at home ever. So my name is Sonia, as you already know. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science. I started my career off with blockchain development because I was kind of interested in what the technology is. And then that ignited my interest towards cybersecurity. Then I currently work as a cybersecurity analyst at Growth Arbor, and most of my work is revolving around GRC and offensive security. However, my personal current focus is APTs or advanced persistent threats, cyber-terrorism, and security regulations within the context of cyber-terrorism. I'm as I said, security analyst, and by night, I'm a student struggling to comprehend sometimes very simple topics, so I feel like I just exposed myself quite a bit here. Let's move on to the actual topic. Unveiling the Shinigami. I know a lot of people might be wondering what a Shinigami essentially is. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to tell you guys exactly what a Shinigami is. So Shinigami is actually a term from Japanese mythology where there's a lot of debate between whether it's a spirit or spirits that call people towards their death. So think of it as the angel of death, but translated into the cyber landscape, you would have Ryuk. Ryuk is the Shinigami of the cyber world, and there's literally no difference between an actual Shinigami and the cyber malware that is Ryuk. And surprisingly, it was found in August, the month of freedom. So Ryuk was like, I really need to get out of here, and I'm so tired of being hidden in shadows. I'm just going to go out there and cause rampage. So the first actual recorded attack that was termed as the malware Ryuk was in August of 2018, where multiple enterprises were targeted. When I say multiple enterprises, I mean very big organizations. Most of them were government organizations within the US. However, there were other organizations. Some were from France, some were from North America, specifically Canada. However, the actual list of targets, we will discuss that further down the presentation. But for now, knowing what Ryuk and when, sorry, not what, but when Ryuk actually started its rampage was the point. And we will move to the next slide. Okay, before we start what Ryuk is and what essentially everything will follow afterwards, we really need to understand what is a malware. A malware is any malicious software that is intended to hurt your system and steal your data and basically make you regret having an online existence. And a lot of times there's this question that comes up that what's the difference between a malware and a virus? And there isn't any actually. In fact, when you talk about malware, you're talking about viruses because there are categories of malware. So every virus is essentially a malware. Ransomware is a type of malware which is, I think, a good analogy for a ransomware would be going to school and your teacher calls your brother and basically she complains about you. So you bribe your brother to not tell your mother. And so that's pretty much what ransomware is. But instead of your brother and your mother and your family, it will attack your system and keep it hostage and ask you to pay a ransom. Now, normally these ransoms are financial sums, but they could be pretty much anything. They could be any informational exchange, it could be any physical exchange as well. So, the term ransom in malware often is associated to financial sum, but it could be associated to pretty much anything the victim holds dear and important to them. So there's another thing which I would like to discuss in this conversation, simply because I feel like a lot of times when we're having, uh, conversations about malware, we don't necessarily discuss these things, and that is that we need to understand what a malware family is. When we talk about malware families, we are talking about multiple malwares that share the same code base. If you're into programming, you know what a code base is. For all of those who do not know what a code base is, it's basically having a similar source code and that is being replicated multiple times. So, for example, Ryuk essentially is a family of malware, just like there are families of other malware such as Hermes, which we will discuss in this slide as well. So Ryuk isn't a standalone malware. It's actually associated to a whole family, which is also called Ryuk family or Ryuk ransomware family. And in these, you will find variation of Ryuks, which will share the same code base, but would have minor changes in the code to basically make itself undetectable. The reason why there are multiple each attack, both the attacker and the defenders are getting very smart because the first time a zero-day vulnerability is a zero-day vulnerability. The second time it's not. So what we're going to be doing now is that we're going to be moving on to the next slide because I think I just talked a bit too much on what a malware is, but I feel like that's an essential part to understand further down the line what Ryuk is. Okay, so Ryuk, as I just mentioned, is a malware family, and that actually has a huge family. And I don't think my talk would have sufficient time to cover each and every variant of Ryuk. But what we need to know is that when we're discussing multiple attacks in Ryuk, you would find a pattern where Ryuk is being manually transferred. So one thing that I would like everyone to know is that there are certain malwares that are essentially provided without any focused targeting of victims. So they're just basically spread around the interwebs, and whoever and whatever becomes victim to it, it's just that. However, Ryuk is a targeted malware. So Ryuk is basically customized as per the reconnaissance phase that has data regarding the victim. So in offensive security, the very first essential step is reconnaissance or gathering information about your target. And when it comes to targeted malware such as Ryuk, that is one of the most crucial phases because that's where you actually sit down and you think about the infrastructure and you find out ways how the infrastructure is, what the infrastructure does, and what essential loopholes there are that you as an attacker, or in this case, Ryuk as a malware, can exploit. So reconnaissance is also essential because that's the very first data that you will utilize to get initial access. And that's pretty much why any targeted malware attack has essentially amazing OSINT done before the actual attack, or any even other very focused strategies for reconnaissance. Okay, so we need to discuss the predecessor of Ryuk. And the reason for that is, well, you will is eventually find out in the next slides. So before Ryuk, there was a Trojan ransomware called Hermes. And Hermes was discovered back in 2017. Now, Hermes essentially targeted a lot of, you know, financial institutions. And the way Hermes worked was that it had these similar patterns of initial access and then attacking phase. That is why when the Ryuk's attack happened in 2018, people thought that this was some type of a variation of Hermes. And this is pretty much what they did, because since they thought this was Hermes, they utilized the steps to stop Hermes for you. But they found out that this is a completely different malware. And so pretty much that's how the differentiation came into place. So I would like to talk a little bit more about the Hermes malware, and why you that is because there's a similar pattern of encryption between Hermes and Ryuk, which we will discuss in the next slide. So when we're talking about encryption, that is essentially one of the core features of any malware. Ransomware. Because the way a ransomware essentially works is that it gets into your system, it gets all of your data or any data that it has been parameterized to consider crucial, it keeps it for itself, and then it encrypts your entire system. And that's why you actually need to pay the ransomware for it. Because the reason you're paying ransom is not to basically get that virus out of your system. You're paying ransomware to get your data out of that system, and then you want to get that virus also out of the system. Because if the virus is still in the system, you cannot retrieve your data because the virus encrypts it, and it actively encrypts it to make sure that even if you have some type of backend strategy, you cannot implement it, because where are you going to implement it if the data that you're trying to save is already encrypted? So the way Ryuk actually encrypts a file, that's a whole process, and we are going to discuss that also. But just a bit of similarities between Hermes and Ryuk. Hermes used to leave a marker while encrypting, and that with a keyword of Hermes. Ryuk does the same thing. So back when the Ryuk kind of came into the whole arena of demolishing data, it kept leaving these encryption markers called Hermes. And so when there were forensics that were, reverse engineering these steps that you took, they found Hermes as the keyword, and they thought that, okay, maybe this is Hermes. And so they started implementing those defense mechanisms that they found were working on Hermes. But that's when they found out that these are failing. And that's when they came to realize that there's something else at play. What exactly that is, we're going to get to it. So without further ado, let's move to the next slide. Now, it's a very interesting question to answer. Who made Ryu? Well, in the world of malware and ransomware and APTs, it's a lot of hush hush because not a lot of people like to own up to the damage they're doing because of the level of sponsors that they're getting. APTs, again, I really need to say this. A lot of times, what we do not know is that when you're talking specifically about APTs, you're talking about a very well organized group of attackers that are very well funded. And most of the times, APTs are groups that are state sponsored and they are part of cyber soldiers that are attacking countries in cyber wars. And so it's a big espionage sort of a situation. And to actually pinpoint who made something is quite difficult. However, allegedly, the people behind Ryuk were a group called Wizard Spider or Grim Spider. They are basically a Russian-based cyber criminal group. Now, do they have ties with the Russian government? I'm not sure, neither can I comment on it. However, their origin were found in Russia. I still want to clarify something. Even if we have found the origin in Russia, there is no evidence to support whether Wizard Spider is actually made up of Russian nationals. They could be made up of anyone. And again, masking that information is very easy. And it's also very difficult to get that unmasked information because of the factors behind these types of groups and these types of high level devastating cyber attacks. Okay, so this is the fun part. This is the part we're going to talk about Ryuk. And for everyone who's actually interested in the mayhem that this malware causes, would find these first slides very, very interesting. So how does Ryuk basically get in your system? Wonderful, wonderful question. And the answer you may think is a bit more technical. There are a lot of things going on, but frankly, most of the Ryuk attacks that were observed in that observation was found that the initial point was a phishing email or an enabled RDP node or basically remote access. In phishing emails, what are they? Again, the scope of this talk might not go into depth of what phishing emails are because that's a whole new world all on its own. But on a surface level definition, a phishing email is an email that has a bait, and you as a victim needs to basically eat that bait in order for the attacker to get started with phishing. So I think that was a bit more complicated. Let me simplify it. So you go to your email, you find an email with the title, "Hey, you want a cruise?" And you're like, "Whoa, I want a cruise. That's amazing." You open the email and you have this big ass paragraph of, "Oh, this happened and that happened, and you do this and you did that." Just click on the following link and you will be allotted with your cruise tickets and other further details. You not thinking straight, click on that link and your credentials are now processed and are hand delivered to the attacker, which essentially you don't find out because you're so excited and the website is working and whatnot. You think that in front of you it is a legitimate email from a legitimate source, and the link that's taking you to another web page is a legitimate web page. However, that's all a ruse, and you just lost access to your email and maybe to most of your data if you're not careful. What is an enabled RDP node? Well, RDP is actually a Windows protocol called Remote Desktop Protocol. And enabled RDP nodes are basically machines or computers or workstations that have this protocol enabled. When you have this protocol enabled, what it does is that it allows remote access to be made to your computer. So if I have a desktop in my house and I'm at work, and I need to access this very important file that's in my laptop and I somehow forgot. And if this RDP protocol is enabled, I can simply connect my office laptop to my home laptop, get that file from it, and just be, safe for the day, because why not, right? Making life simple. However, the same protocol can be utilized by attackers. From a Ryuk standpoint, a phishing email normally has some type of infected URL or a weaponized Word document. I already explained what an infected URL is. And for a weaponized Word document, well, if you ever worked in Microsoft Office, you're well aware of something called macros. Those macros can be manipulated in a way that can trigger a download. And that's exactly what happens in the context of Ryuk. You get a weaponized Word document in this phishing email, and then you download that document thinking this is some important piece of document I need to read. Once you open the document triggers the malicious macro code, and that initiates the download for the further steps of the pandemic. At that point, you might not know what's happening because macros are working on the back end of everything. So you are just viewing a normal Word document. However, the macro is actually enabling, disabling, or whatever it's trying to do, or whatever it's programmed to do is doing just that. Okay, so in the next slide, the URL or the weaponized Word document triggers the download for a dropper malware. What is a dropper malware? Well, a dropper malware, just like the name states, drops some other malware. Think of it as a carrier, or in fact, think of it as a truck. You have these big cargo trucks where you put some type of cargo and they have some type of, items that they're carrying from destination A to destination B. That's exactly what a dropper malware does. And in case of Ryuk, most common dropper malwares were either TrickPort or Blades Loader. Okay. uh, Another thing that I really want to discuss here, I have my notes open right here, so I might be switching back and forth between two screens. Please do not mind that. So the reason why Ryuk uses a dropper malware is because Ryuk is essentially a manual malware. It's not an automatic malware. The reason why it's a manual malware, in my opinion, and as per what I've understood through my research on this topic, is that it needs certain steps to be covered up, and it's that Ryuk as a malware cannot do those steps very well on its own. So it needs some type of protection, and that protection is provided through a dropper malware. Because when you have a dropper malware, you're not essentially downloading Ryuk directly. Because what a dropper malware does is that first it enters in your system, and that system is then being used, like that dropper malware is now being used as a reconnaissance step. So you had done your previous step of reconnaissance, that these are the avenues I will utilize to deliver a type, whatever malware or attack I want to deliver. The dropper malware gets inside your system, and then it essentially starts looking through your system, trying to understand the infrastructure. Is there any type of forensic, software enabled? Is there any filters within your OS that may stop certain services to run? So that's the biggest reason for you to do these types of dropper malware executions. Okay. Move to the next slide. All right. So now you have a dropper malware that enters in your system. And it's, again, it's very, very, it's stealthy in a way that it makes your endpoint security wander around too much. So endpoint security is your, essentially your antivirus. And every antivirus kind of works with signature. A signature is what they use to identify if a program is malicious or not. And when you have variations within the same malware, that variations are coming to change the signature of the malware so that it may not be detected by a endpoint security. When you have a dropper malware that is also being monitored, and most of the times it's a CNC server. So for example, there's a CNC server called Cobalt Strike, and a dropper malware here, what it would do is that it will get communication established between a command and control server to the victim's machine. And when in context of Cobalt Strike, you have something called Cobalt Strike beacons, which are essentially payloads. For those of you who might not know what a payload is, it's based, think of it as a backdoor. So this secret backdoor that only you as the attacker know about, and through which you're going to get out of the system and get into the system. So in case of Ryu, you have a dropper malware, which drops, connects to the CNC server. Then the CNC server sends a beacon or payload. That payload gets inside your system, and then it starts getting the further steps down the road. So this is a visual step that I've created that Ryuk or any dropper malware does. The dropper malware gets into your system. Dropper malware connects to Cobalt Strike beacon. Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike sends a malicious payload. That malicious payload starts breaching the network, such as disabling your antivirus programs, moving laterally in your system, making sure that it's still hidden and it's not visible to your essential software security softwares. Once they have access to the main controller, the domain controller, the grand master of the entire internet, that is when it calls back. It has a callback to the command and control server, and from there Ryuk is downloaded onto that domain controller. So that lateral movement that has been done by the very hardworking dropper malware is what is essentially happening for Ryuk to start working. Otherwise, Ryuk might not be able to work properly, because a lot of variation of Ryuks have found that if you use Ryuk as a standalone malware for all of this, it really fails in certain steps, and it's not really good at hiding in certain steps, at least in these very initial steps of the execution or the exploitation of your system. Okay, so yeah. Okay, one more thing I would like to discuss before we go further is we discussed in the previous slides that the most common malwares for Ryuk, dropper malware for Ryuk, are TrickBot and Load Bracer. A very defining feature of TrickBot is that it can, TrickBot and Hermes both, they can detect virtual environments, especially Hermes. Hermes can very easily know if the victim's machine is a VM or not. And there are certain variations of TrickBot that can do just that as well. Now, why knowing this will be very important for an attacker? This is just a little bit of virtualization or hypervisor 101. But when we are talking about virtual machines, most people might not be aware or may be aware that there are two types of virtualization. So two type of hypervisors. There are type 1 hypervisors, which are bare metal hypervisors, which means that the virtualization software, aka your hypervisor, is directly installed on the physical system. The other type of hypervisor, which is type 2 hypervisor, that is a type of hypervisor where this hypervisor software is installed onto your OS. A very common example for the type 2 hypervisor is VirtualBox or VMware Workstation. Whereas for type 1, we have Hyper-V, Microsoft's Hyper-V. The other one is VMware's EXSI. So when you are in a virtual environment, your lateral movement really depends on your infrastructure. For example, for type 1 hypervisor, the security performance of that hypervisor is very, very, very good. So there are certain aspects that the dropper malware may not be able to handle or may not be able to detect as quickly as it needs to. And for the type 2 hypervisor, again, because it's being hosted on a host OS, its lateral movement will change as well. So knowing the virtual environment, if there is any, is very, very important for, well, technically any type of attack, including Ryuk's attack. Okay, again, we discussed just that there is a dropper malware. We carry that out, and then it does what it needs to do. And you get to the domain controller, and that's where you have a holistic idea of the entire network. So the reason why lateral movement in any type of attack is done is because you really need to make sure that you are at a place where you can view the entire network. Otherwise, your attack might be stopped in the initial stages. Some network infrastructures are developed where you have isolation zones or where you have honeypots involved, where the attacker may think that they're utilizing or attacking a very crucial piece of service, but they are just stuck in a honeypot. And so this gives defenders enough time to isolate systems and make sure that everything is intact and the attacker can easily be removed, like you as a people who might have done surgery remove a tumor. It's a difficult thing to remove a tumor, but so is it is to remove a very pesky little malware. Okay, so move to the next slide. This is again, we are discussing about TrickBot, Emote, Hermes. All of these softwares are there. They can detect VM environments. They can also detect sandboxing environment, which is very, very interesting because Emote, again, is a type of dropper malware, especially in the context of Ryuk. It has been used a lot of times to drop Ryuk in certain attacks, especially there were 2 attacks that were done where we have seen Emote being the dropper malware, and those 2 attacks had victims that were belonging to United States of America's government departments. So sandboxing, if anyone has done programming, they know exactly what it is. For people who haven't, don't worry, I would just tell you what it is. So sandboxing, sorry, just went ahead. Sandboxing environments are used to test some type of software. It's also used to test malicious code, and sandboxing environments are there. For malware analysis, we have a sandboxing environment and we put a software, a malicious code in there, and we try to execute it and we see what it does. And because it's in a sandboxing environment, it will not really harm our actual data. So that's what sandboxing is. And for the dropper malware Emote, if it detects that there is a sandboxing environment, it lays dormant. It doesn't do anything. It just lays dormant and it communicates that back, or basically it doesn't really necessarily communicate anything, because if it lays dormant and there's no communication, the command and control server knows to move to the next node or to try a different initial access point, because this access point will not work. Anyways, again, we are going to be finishing up this section of the slide a little faster because I only have 15 minutes and I have a lot to talk about. So in case of any type of dropper malware, the reason we are using this is because if there is a point where there is a halt for the execution, these dropper malwares buy the attackers enough time to get out of the system without leaving a trace. Because during an active attack, there are chances to reverse engineer it and get back to the origin, including where the attack initiated from. So with dropper malwares, you have enough time to safely get out of the attack without getting detected. Okay, now let's see what Ryuk is actually doing. Okay, once Ryuk is inside your system, the very first thing it does is it starts anti assembly and anti-debugging. Okay, what is that? What does these words mean? So what it does essentially, when you say anti-deassembling and anti-debugging, you're trying to stop certain services that can detect abnormal behavior. Most of the times, these services are being done by your OS. Okay. And the way Ryuk stops it is by manipulating Windows API. What is Windows API? Well, Windows APIs are user-written programs that interact with your Windows OS. This is where all your endpoint security is talking to your Windows OS. So basically, endpoint security software has an API, which is a Windows API. It tells the Windows what to do and what not to do if XYZ is happening. And that is why you might have noticed if you have an antivirus installed and you go to a malicious website, or if there's a malicious program you're trying to install, there's a halt signal from the antivirus that's saying, please stop, don't do it. And the reason why it's all doing it is because it's talking to the Windows, and then the Windows is stopping that service from happening. What does Ryuk do? Ryuk goes into your Windows API, starts manipulating it, and it starts telling Windows API to do things that will allow its existence and further process to be done more sequentially without any interruption, right? Okay, so Ryuk copies itself 3 times. So the first time it copies itself 3 times in the current directory. All of these 3 copies have different names and different tasks to carry out. So the first copy triggers a command line that is responsible for the self-replication of each file. Again, there's one file that will be replicated and will be with the attacker. The other file will be encrypted. The second and third copy triggers a command line that is responsible for sending a wake on LAN packet to other nodes on the network. What is wake on LAN? Well, it is a industry level protocol used to get computers to wake up in a low power state. So once you are on the domain controller, from there you can actually send this particular packet to every computer on your network, right? So that is why Ryuk needs to get to the domain controller to get all of these things done. Okay, before it starts encryption, it first kills a list of services and processes. Again, these services and processes mostly are done for security reasons, and the termination of these processes will help you to do what it's required to do without any disruption and any botheration. So the known processes and services, the number of their actual type of processes that are stopped